Hello, this is Dennis Madden with another edition of Gears Overdrive. This is for the October-November 2024 edition of Gears Magazine, and it accompanies an article called Thinking It Through, A Bump in the Road. This is a new column, and it's designed to help technicians go through the thinking process for diagnosis. It's also going to be part of, or I should say, it is part of another article in that very issue called The Harsh Realities. And we'll use portions of that as we go through this diagnostic process. Now, I'm going to share my screen and then we'll work through the process. Okay, here's our checklist. These are the 7 items that affect shift feel, whether it be a harsh shift or a soft shift. And they are line pressure, flow rate, accumulators, cushion springs and wave plates, steel plate and drum surface, friction plate composition, and fluid type. Now, these are all covered in great detail in another article in this very issue called The Harsh Realities. And I'll go through each of these in this article as we work to find the answer to the customer's complaint. Now, the customer's complaint is a harsh 1-2 shift, as you see in the heading. This is on a 2007 Chevy Silverado. It has a 5.3 liter engine with a 4L60E transmission. So the complaint started about a month ago. Before that, it was working fine. So something happened to that transmission during that time frame, and now they have a complaint. One question is, has anyone worked on the vehicle? And the answer, no one. All right, no one had worked on or serviced it. And this means it's not fluid, friction, drum service, or rebuilder error, because obviously it hadn't been worked on. But it could be a broken servo cushion spring. Now, this is important to go through this process because you'll notice we took fluid, friction, and drum service, 3 of the items right off the table. And of the 7, that gives us 4 left. And it was simply by asking that question, had anyone worked on the vehicle or serviced it? And the answer was no. So it's very easy to eliminate those. We could go in and check for the servo cushion spring and see if that's broken, but let's go a little bit further before we get into that. One other thing about the complaint is it gets worse with heavier throttle. And I would suspect a line pressure problem at that point, or it's our next thing to verify and check. Now, something that you want to do at this stage is ask the question, is there any system that controls pressure going to a shift element, a one shift element versus any other? That is to say, is the line pressure control related to all shifts, or does it have a system that can vary it based on one shift element? And so for that, we're going to look at the oil schematic. And you can see that it's very simple. It has, there's your pressure control solenoid. You have the oil that feeds into it, and the computer controls the solenoid to send it to 2 places, the accumulator valve, which, by the way, we cover in greater detail in that other article that I mentioned, and then it goes up to the boost valve. So when answering that question, no, this system does not have any features that will vary pressure to one shift component versus the entire system. So if there's a pressure related problem, it would have to be that the computer is doing something odd only during the 1-2 shift, which is highly unlikely. Now, we can put a pressure gauge on it and verify, and I would say at this point, a habit or practice that you should get into is get a gauge on as many transmissions as you can, not just vehicles that have a problem, but vehicles that work right. That way you can understand and recognize what normal looks like. Now, once you have that, it'll be very obvious when you get a transmission that has a line pressure problem, you'll see it immediately. But if you wait until you're checking the pressure only on something that has a failure, it's very difficult to understand that because you don't have anything to compare it to. So now we're ready to road test and check out the car. Here's a couple of things that we want to uh, keep in mind. Now, we're dealing with a harsh 1-2 shift complaint, but I would say this goes for anything that you're working on. Check the fluid level, but do not adjust it. And the reason is you want to drive the vehicle and experience the customer's complaint. If you find that fluid level is low, for example, and you bring it to normal, you could drive the car and not have a complaint. So just get into the habit, don't do anything to it, but mark it down as the condition of the fluid and the level, and then go to the next step and check for trouble codes. And again, do not make any repairs. If it has a check engine light, do not do anything to repair that. If it has historical codes, do not erase them. Don't touch it other than recognizing what it has. And now you're going to verify the complaint. Now, I prefer going with the customer so they can point the complaint out, but it's not necessary, and sometimes it's an inconvenience to the customer, and so we don't want to do that. But you'll now go and verify the complaint. And if it had a fluid level problem or any trouble codes, that would be the time, once you verified it, to make those adjustments and road test the vehicle again to see if there were any changes in the complaint. All right, this leaves us with only two things to look at. The separator plate orifice and the accumulator. Now, let's recap there for a moment. We've already verified that it's not a fluid or friction materials matter because it hadn't been worked on. It's not the surface of the drum. We've checked the servo cushion and that the spring there, and that's okay. We've gotten rid of 4 things. We've done our line pressure check. We suspected that it wasn't line related anyway because the system doesn't have features to affect one shift versus the other, but go ahead and make that line pressure check. So 5 things you've been able to eliminate right off the bat. This leaves the separator plate orifice and a broken accumulator spring. Now, this is highly unlikely that you're going to have this problem, but you'll notice where the arrow is over here. This is the number 8 check ball. It seats in this hole, and then the oil going to the servo is forced to go through the orifice there, right there. And what can happen, it's very rare that this happens, but what can happen is the ball beats through that plate and blows through the hole and is now on the other side. What happens there is then you have an unrestricted flow of oil going to the servo, and it'll be pretty brutal. The thing is, though, it doesn't change under throttle conditions like the customer's complaint. So it's highly unlikely, but at this stage, you're going to be dropping the pan to either check the plate or the accumulator. And I left the illustrations of the accumulator out for this issue because we went so extensively in the other article. But what it led us to is that the customer's complaint here was a broken accumulator spring. I'm going to leave it at that for the purpose or for the reason that it was covered so heavily in the other article. But when you drop the pan, you take the accumulator housing off, you would find the broken accumulator spring, resolve that problem, and off we go. You could, at that point, inspect the pan and see if there's debris or any materials that suspects further damage, something that you may have to look at further, or you could replace the accumulator spring, put it back together, road test it, and see if the complaint goes away. Well, there you have it. That was a simple one. And for the trained diagnostician, they would be able to point right to that just from the road test. If you felt a slide bump anywhere in your career and you've done enough of them, it's very, very easy to identify. It practically works normal at very light throttle and gets worse as you give it gas. The sensation that you feel is there's something happening. You just can't quite put your finger on it. And then all of a sudden, bang, you get the bump. And the customer will consider that a harsh shift complaint. The key to this is, and it's what makes it really obvious, measures that you may take to soften the shift. Let's say this was a 700 or something with a throttle cable or link. If you attempted to soften the shift, you'd actually make the complaint worse because the slide portion of the slide bump becomes more pronounced. Anyway, that's it for this edition of Gears Overdrive. Dennis Madden, thank you very much, and I look forward to another session.